Welcome, everyone. My name is EJ Bryn, and I'm the Associate Director of Stakeholder Engagement at the BC Council for International Education, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the intersection of race and intercultural on our campuses. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and it is my honor to invite Elder Latash Maurice Lehaney to open this session off with a welcome. Elder Latash.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you today. Osiam, Tanoya, Tanoan Sayam and Siaya, Sayoya Kwa, Klachid Nomen Anhot and Squallowan, Nath to Uns, Latash Gashamain, Tanalachon, Oslahan Ochameo, Skohumashoth, No Chai Menwahat, Almanax and Squallowan Sitsi. Well, greetings to all of you. The name I carry is Latash. I am from the village of Oslahan in North Vancouver. I'd like to welcome all of you. This is taking place on a traditional area of Vancouver. And our people knew this area as Kamalai, which means place of maple trees. Our people lived here for thousands of years in very fortunate circumstances, such a great abundance. We like to think of this as the forest because the forest is also our pharmacy, providing us the medicines to survive, providing the resources to have shelter and have a good life. I'm especially honored to be here on this occasion of discussions of racial matters. This is so very important. My friends, my relatives, I want to share with you that I have an interracial background myself. My great-great-grandfather came from Hawaii seeking a new life here in North America, as did my Irish great-great-grandfather who came to North America seeking a better life. And our Squamish people here, we have always lived in a way that we could utilize our traditions and to find new ways of doing things. It is so unfortunate, the incident that took place a few days ago in the community of Lynn Valley here in North Vancouver. It is an example how we have so many issues to deal with. They could be mental issues or physical issues. We don't know the cause of this incident, but we do need to find ways to support each other, especially supporting those families who have gone through such a traumatic incident in their life. We are praying for their well-being. We're in a very difficult time of pandemic, and this is really a time when we all need to work together, regardless of race, religion, or other backgrounds. We all need to support each other so that we can live a good life here in British Columbia and everywhere in the world. We need to ease tensions between each other, accept our similarities, and embrace the differences, because that really enriches our lives. So I thank each and every one of you for being able to join in on this webinar. Thank you to our speakers today, Kumai Beck and Olivia Zhang. Thank you for being here to share with us a way forward. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day. Have a good day and take care of yourselves. Osia.
Thank you, Elder Latash. What a wonderful opening. Thank you for sharing your history and really setting the scene for the conversation we're going to have today and the backdrop, especially with the recent incidences that have been going on locally. And also for reminding us of the need for us to work together and support each other during these really challenging times. This opening is also a reminder of how important it is for us to not only acknowledge the history of these lands, but also take these learnings to inform our policies and programs from now and into the future, ensuring that they serve everyone in a more meaningful and effective way. As always, I would like to extend my respect to the lands that everyone is participating in this session resides on, and welcome you to place your own acknowledgements into the chat box as we continue the conversation. So this webinar is part of our intercultural series that runs once a month through May. On our website, you can find out more details about some of the past sessions and some of the future webinars that are coming in April and May. I would like to encourage all of you to take a look at the website and take a look at that certificate of completion. If you haven't, it's not too late. You can check out the details. It is a really interesting opportunity that we have, so please go ahead and check out that website when you have a chance. I also want to remind everyone that this session is an hour and a half. I know for those of you that have come to our last few in the new year, you know this, but for those who may be joining us for the first time, it is an hour and a half to allow for a little bit more Q&A time. So now on to a few housekeeping items. We thank you for agreeing to our respectful workplace policy and for fostering a welcoming, growing, respectful, and safe environment for all. While microphones have been muted, you can connect with us in various ways. There's the chat box. If you want to chat with other attendees or comment on something more broadly, just be sure to change the drop down to all panelists and attendees. You can also ask for technical assistance, and my colleague Tara Lynn can help you there. So thank you, TL, in advance for that. There's the Q&A box as well, which is just to the right or the left of the chat box. And you can put your questions in there for Kumari and Olivia. Feel free to type those throughout the session. For everyone who is participating, you can also upvote some of those questions. So if somebody asks a question that you're interested in hearing, feel free to upvote those so we get to those sooner. We will have the Q&A time at the end, as always. So now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Todd Odgers, Associate Dean for International at BCIT, who will set the scene for this webinar and introduce our speakers for today. So Todd, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. And yeah, thank you very much, EJ. And thank you so much, Elder Latash. So good to see you. And it's so nice to have the continuity of you joining these webinars, because it helps us to sort of feel that continuity as we go forward on these themes. We have, I'm still impacted from the dialogue that we had with Minnie Jean Brown-Trickey last month rather, in February. And I think that today is a fantastic continuation on themes that Minnie Jean was talking about. And I know that Olivia and we had a conversation about how it made her feel about Minnie Jean's presentation and what she shared from her experiences in the 60s up to the present. We're looking at the intersections of race and intercultural on our campuses today, and Olivia Jung and Kumari Beck, have deep lived and studied perspectives on today's themes. And I'll just do a brief introduction. Many of you are probably familiar with both of these local scholars and practitioners, but let me start with Kumari and then I'll move to Olivia. Kumari is an associate professor at the Faculty of Education and also co-director of the Center for Research on International Education at Simon Fraser University. She's investigated critical internationalization of the curriculum, equity in education, international development, and has had a strong focus on equity, social justice, anti-racism, and in particular, one of the conversations that I'd love to have with Kumari is around critical multiculturalism. Our other panelist, Olivia. Olivia is the Director of Education at Trinity Language Center at Trinity Western University. And she's been very involved in comparative and international education, as well as how it intersects with TESOL, teaching English as a second or other language, and BC Teal. Her research and her PhD focused on language, looked at culture, literacies, curriculum, and pedagogy. And I know that as we progress through the sharing of her research, and then later some of the tools that she's developed over her experiences, she's bringing her lived experience, having immigrated and done some very, very, very grounding research at SFU and in her own institution. And I'm looking forward to what she has to share with us as practitioners today. So this is welcome, both of you. Nice to see both of you. And what we're going to do is we're going to start, I think, today with Olivia. And Olivia, you know, I'm thinking, can you start us in this with what you've learned from your personal experience, your research, and why is this topic deeply important to international education and educators?
Sure, thanks, Todd. I would be very happy to do that. Hello, I'm Olivia Zhang, and thanks for EJ and for BCCIE for the invitation to this webinar. And I am an Aboriginal from a seaside town in North China. Now I came to Canada with my family as an immigrant 14 years ago. And the place I now call home, the city of New Westminster, is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Tikai First Nation, as well as all Coast Salish peoples. So before I came to Canada, I was an associate professor of English in the university, and I had planned to work on a doctoral degree in a Canadian university to fulfill a long cherished dream. I secretly thought that my BA and MA in English language and literature in a non-English speaking country was less than satisfactory, if not disappointing. And I was quite confident with my English when my doctoral studies started officially in 2008. To my dismay, the glory of the past position as a university professor of English in China just, faded away quite fast. I found some concepts, ideas, and vocabularies like power relations, inequality, racism, discrimination, just alien to my ears, were virtually unheard of in my Chinese worldview. And this lack of knowledge, as well as other challenges that I went through at the early stage of my studies, led me to my dissertation research on some international students in the Canadian University.
So this was quite a jarring experience for you, Olivia.
Right. Yeah, it was pretty hard, and I bet Kumari knows a lot about that.
And I haven't really let on, but both of you know each other extremely well. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Please continue, Olivia.
Sure. So this lack of knowledge, I found this, what I have gone through were also some challenges for some students, some Chinese international students in the pathway language program in the university. And I was working as a TA with them at the time being. And yeah, so these students, I could actually see their struggles from their facial expressions at the time being in the classroom. And these students were enrolled in the university conditionally, and they had to pass the program and achieve a 6.0 in a designated IELTS test, to get official admission to the university. So, my non-native English speaker position became the common ground, as you can see, between me and the participants, and I became one of them who came from afar with histories and stories for international education. And their current experiences in Canada informed of and shaped by their past, or our expectations for international education, in fact. And also these experiences and expectations pointed to their imagined futures after they finished education. So although my legal status was an immigrant at the time being, I identified myself as an international student. I'm one of them who are much more than, the questioning identity of a deficient English speaker. So it became apparent to me later on that little research has been conducted on the detailed lived experiences of international students, especially Chinese, those from China. Although such experiences constitute important strands in the cultural fabric of Canadian universities, according to John's 2011, insufficient effort has been made to understand how international students, important participants in the internationalization in Canada, experience and perceive their university lives, according to back 2013. So
can I just underline that point? Because I think really you're getting to the core of our conversation. So students were not, like, we are not investigating enough and not incorporating the experiences and perspectives of our international students enough in our campus internationalization process.
I would say yes, because mainly, they would be regarded, oh, they are second English learners, their English is not so good, they need to learn. And so they are just usually regarded as insufficient English speakers, English learners. So they are not, considered as whole individuals who are with histories, with stories, and with day-to-day lived experiences out of classroom. So this is the point that I was mentioning.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So this discovery convinced me to explore the perspectives of these students more deeply by pursuing a study of my own. And I knew I wanted to know more about my students' full educational journey, as it started in the past in China, continued in Canada, and is leading to pathways in their futures. So I used a narrative inquiry as the method and methodology in the doctoral research and examined how their identities as second language learners and transnationals were shaped and transformed in the process of pursuing international education in Canada. The study focused on how their past expectations, current efforts, and imagined the futures of English learning were linked during their trajectories in a Canadian university. So TC, could you share the slide, please? So the story data that I collected is very fruitful and thought-provoking in many different ways. In what follows, I'll present some of the stories from the perspective of racial identities and microaggression. Next slide, please. There is much literature on how international students from East Asian countries did not regard race as marker of identity when they just arrived, and race only gradually becomes salient to them when they became minority and Asian, and in my study, Chinese. In the process of developing those racial identities, many international students of color experience actually various forms of discomfort. So, of course, race itself, in a sense, is only one Western phenomenon that they started to learn, and me as well, understand, experience in Canada. So other Western phenomena would include the vocabulary just mentioned, racism, prejudice, and discrimination, etc. The concept of racial microaggression is used to describe brave daily verbal, behavioral, or as you can see on the slide, environmental indignities were intentional or intentional that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racist slights and insults toward people of color, according to Sui et al. In 2007. Next slide, please. And many authors have explored racial microaggressions, as you know, in various studies. In 2014, Hushman, Spellerman, and Tafrati proposed 6 types of microaggressions experienced by Asian international students specifically. And they provided names and description for each, which we could see on the screen. Also, you may have noticed I have added hierarchical microaggression ingrained as defined by Yang et al. In 2015, because I found the environmental microaggression could be more powerful when supplemented by a hierarchical microaggression, which I will use to analyze the story of my participant on their IELTS test. So this is my attempt to use a hierarchical microaggression to analyze, a story related to IELTS. Next slide, please. Here are two stories on being excluded and not or avoided by Katie and Zoe, and on how they felt excluded and avoided in class. So for Katie, as we can see from the quote, she was paired up with in the philosophy class with a native boy, and she said the boy was quite young. He's a native English speaker. He didn't care to listen to my broken English and grew irritated as I tried to express myself. He even didn't try to be polite and cover his impatience. I was so sad after class that I kept asking myself why I would be forever inferior. She was referring to her English, and she really has been struggling, and she's been working so hard, but so this is what Kat experienced in her classroom. And the other one, on Zoe, as we can see, she was trying to approach a girl and who seemed friendly to her, and she thought would be a great idea to have her, in the group project. But the local girl said sorry very politely. I felt that she was keeping a polite distance. So from me. In these two courses, we can see the first one, the boy wasn't trying to even to cover. And in the second case, the girl was polite, but somehow there was an invisible line, according to Zoe. Next slide, please. For rendered invisible and ascription of intelligence, it means the contribution to classes either unwanted or personal characteristics were ascribed according to racial and cultural stereotypes. And here, Stephen was in a group doing a group project on ethical issues in business trade and business and trade. And as you could see, he said he did a lot of research and he had much to say, but while he was contributing, he was interrupted by a girl, and she was trying to check with him if her understanding of Stephen's point was correct. And not quite, in fact, but I just nodded without further explanation. Then she said jokingly with a smile, "We'll count on you more in accounting." And I smiled too, but felt a little uncomfortable. So as we can see, Asian, especially Chinese people, sometimes are stereotyped as being good at math. And I guess, this girl had that with her, even unawarely. Next slide, please. So disregarded international values and needs refers to when white peers sometimes were insensitive to the cultural perspectives and needs of international students. So in this quote, North was trying to join a conversation by two other white peers. And that they were talking about the weekend plans, and North thought it was a good chance to join the conversation because he was planning to celebrate a traditional Chinese festival. But he said one of them nodded and said, "Oh, interesting," and then kept talking about their plans. I was hoping to tell them more about the Chinese festival. I felt a little embarrassed. Next slide, please.
Embarrassed, how interesting.
Yeah. So for environmental and hierarchical migrations, I have included 2 stories. One again was from Caddy, and I would like to just pay attention to the story itself. So in my 3rd semester, I took the business communication course with a lot of writing assignment. The professor commented that I should drop the class, saying that I should take a basic writing class before taking this one. When I went to his office hour for help, he insisted that I drop the class. He said my writing was not okay and I should drop and go to another university for a basic business class before repeating this one. And she was very sad and she was under great pressure, and she thought it was not reasonable because she was admitted to the class and now the professor told her to drop. And it was a big blow to her. And he said that my writing was awkward. And I still don't know why the expressions were awkward. Then I emailed him and asked if I could seek help for my writing so that I could fix my awkward expressions before my submission of the assignment. But he said no, and that I could only go to teachers, English Learning Commons, and the TA for help. But when I did go to him for help, he said I need to drop. So I think, it's very clear that Caddy is in a position that, which is less powerful and lower ranked, of course. And he is a very tough girl. He didn't drop, he knew he would fail, but he still finished the course because she said she paid for the course and she would like to learn and got to know why she failed, and she would come back and repeat with better performance. So next slide, please. I'm a loser. So identity of international students as test takers. So this story of Zoe's is actually on their IELTS test taking experiences. And as I said, I was actually trying to make use of the hierarchical microaggression perspective to look at her story. So again, by hierarchical microaggression, young ADL meant that the everyday slides found in higher education that communicate systematic value or devaluing of a person because of the institutional role held by that person. They intended to shed lights on how marginalized, less powerful, or lower ranked individuals are subjected to bullying in higher education. The previous case of Caddy's, I would say, was bullying. And now for Zoe, her story on writing the IELTS test can manifest very clearly her feeling of marginalization and powerlessness. So as you can see on the slide, she took the test at least 10 times. And she said the IELTS organization, institution, IELTS training schools owe me a medal. I've spent so much time and money in preparing and writing this one test. And she was working for a 6.5 because she wanted to get enrolled a graduate program. But as she said, I think I've been under great pressure and this is the most painful part. Without the score, I can't get enrolled and I can't see any future. I don't want to give up and go back without getting my degree as planned. Otherwise, I would be a loser. And I didn't come to Canada to become a loser, but I think I am a loser anyways because I can't get the score. I need the score to move on, and I need the score to show that I'm not inferior to other people. If other people can do that, I can do that too. So yeah, as I said, I'm just venturing to understand English language proficiency policy of colleges, universities for international students whose first languages are not English as a structural factor in hierarchical microaggression. And I would argue that this hierarchical migration affects the identities of international students as test takers.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm wondering, you know, I know that you were working also with Kumari, and Kumari shared some of these kinds of perspectives as well on, this is powerful, like the students' experiences that you're sharing. And I'm wondering, is it, Kumari, have you shared some perspectives on, obviously you're familiar with this research as well as some of your own, and I'm wondering, Olivia has really put a bright light on student experiences with regards to microaggressions, and then how, the kind of emotional, psychological and emotional impact it can have on their ability to persevere, be resilient, and be fully partnering as members of our campus community and participating, you know, in the way that they really could.
Yeah, so let me first of all begin by saying I'm speaking to you from the stolen lands of the Kwantlen people in a very colonial Fort Langley. And I speak as an immigrant settler. And immigrant groups are the first people that I worked with. And again, our experience, as you know, we all know, it's well acknowledged now, when you move, like your prior experience is never enough, and it's always the task of newcomers, and I put in international students and immigrants, there's this commonality of never being good enough. So this idea of, you know, not having Canadian experience. So it kind of led me to work, one of the few places that I was considered good enough to work with were with fellow immigrants. And interestingly, I could teach English to them because I was deemed to not have an accent. That so those are the two criteria, right? So
you had their experience and you don't have an accent.
Exactly, yeah. So ideally, it's a rare combination to kind of aspire to, right? With that piece. And so, and it's interesting that even being brought in with that discourse of what is needed to succeed in Canada, I also came in with that lens, right? Of saying, yeah, if only we can fix these immigrants now with getting them learning English. And then this is sort of one of those job settlement programs where we gave them a sort of work experience, you know, at various work sites to see if they could, you know, be integrated into Canadian society. And then after a couple of years, 2 or 3 years of working with these groups, I kind of had this switch because of not even realizing how I had been kind of enculturated, if you will, to get into this mindset of fixing those people who come in so that then they can fit in.
It's so funny, Kumari, because you know my background. I worked at the Center for Excellence in Alberta, and we worked with workplaces, and I bet I was told 12 to 15 times by an HR manager or someone, can you please fix them?
Yeah.
I'm laughing because Center, we would go in, we go like, oh, okay, we got a lot of work to do here. Yeah, so.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then you get into that groove, right? Of what will it take to fix them? And then, you know, of course, when you work with them, you realize they are parents who are worried about raising children. They are people with oodles of experience, both work experience and life experience. And yet we kind of bring them down to the realm of how to get you speaking. Many of them were taking classes, and sadly, to meet the demand, there were colleges running classes on accent reduction.
Right.
And so who am I to tell them, no, 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 that's demeaning, don't do that, right? So rather than teaching people to have clear communication, and that accent was not the problem, but clarity of communication. But so then I started to have this change as you start sort of getting into the stories of people, just like Olivia started with gaining the stories of those she works with. So the importance of having opportunities to get to know people, then you can see that no, this is not the situation. So fast forward that. When I came to work at SFU, it was with the International Teacher Education Office. And during that, even though initially my work was not with international students, I began to see the patterns of how international students were brought in and they had to be fixed.
Yeah.
Because they came in as this kind of odd thing. Oh, we want to bring international students in to diversify our campuses, as if we don't have enough diversity already at home, right? And then at the same time, once they arrive, we want to actually correct them in every way possible. And I think my decision to go into this line of research and into graduate studies was this horrendous incident once. It was in our hallways, and this one very senior professor, so thankfully they have retired. I can now speak about this story. They popped out of their office and in a very loud voice yelled at some students, and we didn't even know if they were international or whatever, yelled at a bunch of students who were speaking, and I believe it was Mandarin, yelled at them, speak English. You are in Canada. You are a disgrace to our student population. And I think it reverberated so harshly. And of course, these people hide behind their notion of academic freedom, right? This person was a researcher in learning English or teaching English. So then they feel that they have this authority to be able to do this. And right then and there, I was shocked into saying, okay, I need to hear more from the students. And that's how I got into researching the experiences of international students. Because as much as saying we need to fix them, what about fixing ourselves as host institutions? We need a lot of fixing.
It takes two to tango, you know, I mean. Like,
exactly, yeah.
You know, what are those dance steps? Yeah.
Right. And so this is how I met Olivia. And this is one of several SSHRC-funded studies that we did. And again, so this is where I was interested in the experiences of people that will inform not just how we understand the arena, but will inform the way we design our spaces and inform our policies and our practices on international education, internationalization, and welcoming of international students.
But I really like what you just said there. Really, you're describing today's session very much. It's like, what do we know? What have we noticed that we can point to that says this is actually the state of things as they are? Mm-hmm. What are some useful perspectives that we can use, and then what can we do about this? You know, and it's so great. I mean, it's so interesting that, you know, the individual that said that in the it's amazing the things that give us fire in our belly to lean into the challenges that become our life's work. So thanks. I'm wondering, you know, as we progress through this, your relationship with Olivia has been really probably mutually informing. And we also are living in this fast evolving time of, we have COVID, we have the ongoing urgency of what Black Lives Matter is showing us. You know, in last month's session with Minnie Jean, Brown Trickey, she spoke of her experience in the 60s and the civil rights, and how at times she feels a little despair, I think, for how little progress sometimes has been made on these topics. And I'm wondering what you're seeing around you in either of your institutions now, because you're describing something that happened, that has happened. What's happening in your institutions now, or in your research, that is helping us to address these microaggressions, address this latent racism in our system, active racism in our system? Kumari, do you want to?
Sure. I think it was a lot of conversations with other scholars as well as research participants in our studies that have led me to a deeper understanding of this. And I think I'm going to share a couple of slides of a little bit of that progression of understanding that occurred for me. Because I think before, this is what research has taught me, that before we run around trying to do something and find solutions, that it's really important that we deeply understand what's going on. And I think that's what Olivia did so well as well, in helping us to understand what microaggressions really are, right? Instead of our getting defensive. So let me just.
And the impact, because you get the impact in their words. I mean, when your student says, "I'm a loser," oh my goodness.
Yeah. So in my experience, race has never been a popular topic of conversation in internationalization and in international education, because we always, even in the definitions of internationalization, you'll find that there's always this talk about culture. And so we hide behind the idea of culture, and we don't really talk about cultural difference and about how that difference sets off these tensions and difficulties about how we create otherness amongst ourselves. So for me, it was a deeper understanding of how race operates that helped me to actually go behind to see what are these divisions. And in fact, it's interesting because a lot of people will say, no, don't talk about race. It's very divisive. And then actually I found the opposite, that the more we understand how race operates, then we can begin to see where the root problems are, right? So I'm talking now just very briefly about the different kinds of racism. So we have this, what we call the common sense racism, that is normalizing the negative experiences, right, of the racialized students. So like in Olivia's term, oh, well, yeah, I'm the one, right, who is the problem here. And I need to take these tests 10 times, or I need to go and I need to drop this business course, etc. And then the other one is the denial of systemic racism, that it's only a few bad people. If we can fix the bad people and teach them a lesson or ban them from our classes or whatever, then, you know, everything is fine. So this recognition that racism is systemic. And this other piece that I discovered was something called democratic racism by Henry and Tater, who are very well-known Canadian scholars in this field, in sociology. And so they talk about how these tensions, is what they call moral tensions, occur in university spaces, which are dominated by white culture. So this dominance of white culture is not even this idea of numerical, you know, in terms of numbers, but who sets the standards, the norms, the rules, the policies, right? That's what I mean by white culture. And so the everyday experiences and lived experiences of students and faculty versus it pits the perceptions and responses of white educators and administrators, right? So democratic racism, according to Henry and Tater, is this ideology in which these two conflicting sets of values are made kind of congruent to each other. They're both coexist, right? And so that has resulted in the lack of support for policies and practices that may address those issues, because of course we tend to listen to the dominant story, right? The dominant narrative. And so then we resort to the common sense racism, which is like, oh yeah, it's normal. When you come here, you go through hardship. And so then we put down racism as the behavior of a small number of people. And so let me go to right. So these are some of the things, I mean, and Olivia well knows that we have tons and masses of data from students about their experiences of this, which is, you know, which has been hidden behind this notion of acculturation, that's normal. Put me down. There's something lacking. You know, this student felt that they could never, ever belong because there's always something lacking in me. And then they come back to this sort of victim blaming, right? Maybe it's me. I never know. And this was a student who was a doctoral student in physics, very, very highly qualified. But she felt that, and she chose to remain silent in her class because her professor would never acknowledge that she even had the brains or the smarts to sort of do anything. And so she wanted to make very sure that when she did speak, it was with everything sort of put down pat. And so she actually said when she got her midterm or her first assignment back, her professor looked at her and said, "Oh, this is really good. I never expected it of you," right? So this common thing of people are shrunk, their identities are shrunk to the way they speak English. And this is again leads to this other quote of, they think we're stupid. And this constant feeling of dread that even if you are white passing, or even if you can blend in with, you know, the diversity of our campuses, they say, oh, once you speak, they know. It's like you're being outed as this international student, which is a terrible thing for them. And and then that final quote, right? I feel international all the time. And that is for them a very negative thing, in the sense that we found this theme of visibility and invisibility, in the sense that they become visible in terms of their deficits, but they're always invisible in terms of the strengths, the knowledges, the background that they actually bring. So this feeling international is not what we think of as like, oh, great, this poster child for internationalization process, right? It is something that they hide behind, and they're always kind of like, you know, in the spotlight. And so this is a faculty member sort of actually talked about this process, and because he himself had been an international student. And he talked about, yeah, it's very hard, but if you survive, if you overcome the challenge, country not your own, language not your own, culture not your own, better, that this prepares that you become a stronger scholar, a stronger person. And this is again something to aspire to, that if you get through it. And so this is kind of set as the norm. And when this is set as the norm, it really hides the ability of students and anyone to actually bring light to their experience and to sort of hide their experiences of being less than. And this has been going on for a long time. And, you know, Todd, I think we talked earlier too, there have been many incidents, like it takes a big incident like George Floyd to bring us to recognize that something is really the matter. And actually, we have had in our Canadian history many incidents of bringing us to this realization, but we somehow don't quite take that leap. I mean, looking at the experiences of Indigenous peoples alone should bring us to that place of understanding. But so in regards to international students, around 10 years ago, Maclean's, I don't know if many of you can even go back that far, but Maclean's had a very controversial because they had the whole special issue And this was about the time they had rankings on, right? Which is another story. But they had their whole main headline was, "Too Asian, some frosh don't want to study at an Asian university." And the whole issue was full of students saying how they don't like to come to universities where they're taking in all these international students, especially from China, because they're taking up our spots and so on. So with the backlash that came up, barely 2 weeks later, they changed their digital online story with a question mark, "Too Asian?" So in other words, they're
Really?
distancing themselves, right, from their racist sort of comment. And then it changed even further in November. So this was in May. In November, they changed their whole digital story to "The enrollment controversy. Worries that efforts in the US to limit enrollment will lead to them coming to Canada." And so this idea of
Revising their
exactly,
histories.
yeah, right. And so, and then they actually had a retraction about their story. Oh, it's not about racism, right? And so, "Too Asian is not about racism," say students like Alexandra, and how they're competing with Asians, requires a sacrifice of time. And they complain that they can't compete and they can't party as much as they like, right? Asian kids, meanwhile, say they're resented for taking the spots of white kids. And so these stories, at graduation, a Canadian white mother told me, "I'm the reason her son didn't get a space at university, and that all the immigrants in the country are taking up university spots." So these are the everyday stories that they get from community members, right? And so Frankie says, "I knew it was wrong being generalized," and says, "Heck, I worked hard for it." And so after that, there was a lot of scholarship on the topic, including this book done by Gilmore, Bandar here, and Michael Marr, a sociologist. And this is a really good book, by the way. It highlights a lot of the stories, but also the problem, the issue of racism. But again, we still come down to this idea of racism as a few bad apples. So the other piece that I want to raise about racism is that this whole, the discourse on multiculturalism, that because we are diverse and that we have people from many, many, many different countries and cultures and backgrounds, that we are multicultural, simply the presence of this means there is no racism here, right? Because we are diverse and people like to come here. And a lot of the promotion done by EduCanada websites and the Government of Canada promotion on recruiting students also promote this. If you read all the websites and so on, they promote this idea that we're very welcoming, we're very hospitable. And so when students do come here and experience that, again, they go back to this thing of it must be me, because everyone else thinks that, multiculturalism is a good thing. And so Carol Schick and Berna St. Dennis, and they're talking about this, and they talk about how multiculturalism has led us to construct ourselves in Canada as the good nation. And this is also a problem with colonial Canada, right? How can we, benign Canada, ever be bad, right?
We're the white helmets.
Exactly, right?
We're the good people, right?
We're the good people. So this is where the rhetoric of multiculturalism is enacted, as they say, as a symbol of the good nation. So this is why we have the celebration of cultural difference, and therein the narrative of us as being raceless, benevolent, and innocent, right? So we don't go further than that. And so this is Sarah Ahmed and her 2012 book. And then she talks about how universities, and particularly she's talking about the UK and Australia where she has experience. Then she talks about university internationalization in particular as being about image management, right? The optics. And so diversity then becomes about changing perceptions of whiteness. So we have all these diverse pictures and we have all the diversity with a celebration of diversity, rather than changing the whiteness of organizations. And so this is where I want to connect up, with this initial story about, rather than thinking about fixing our international students, could we read differently? Could we hear differently? Could we listen? Could we, do all of that? And what are we doing ourselves to welcome people from different backgrounds, but also understand what notions of difference do to ourselves, right? And so we invite the world to our shores in creating this more cultural diversity. And many of you will be very familiar with these kinds of promotional, images. And then so we bring these international students as the bearers of culture. And again, so so we celebrate them for the culture they bring, but then when they come, it's about containing that diversity. So this cultural difference, we do our darndest to not acknowledge what they bring, the gifts that they bring, and the knowledges and the backgrounds. But again, we have these rules. So this is from Jenny, who talks about, again, echoing the research that Olivia did. We should globalize, but actually we only use one language, right? So it means we should respect every single language or food or other things like that, but we just use English. So the dominance of that, and we get it, that you have to have a language of communication, but it doesn't mean you have to shut down or forget about acknowledging the strength of knowing multiple languages. Like, do we even bring in the necessity of knowing another language as a basic graduation requirements, right? It's like, so this kind of double standard that we have around looking at global things. And so again, this is a couple of other student voices. I'm the only foreigner in this research group. And this is, again, Carlos is a graduate student, a doctoral student. I'm begging them for access, never heard back from the team. And then they tell me, here, you do this. The task was, like really simple, like changing the slides, I think he said. And I feel like they're telling me, this is all I can do, right? And then, so it goes to this feeling, as Naomi says, I recognize myself as worthless in being a student here. And so, and I'm going to stop here. Many of the students, I think what they were talking about was, this was a student from Hong Kong, and we called him, Blue. He called him, his student name was Blue. He said, it's only the facade of showing international. And I'm going to stop there with, back to you, Todd.
Wow. If we look at, as we spoke about building these presentations and conversation, we wanted to create a grounding of demonstrating that these experiences are indeed happening. And we wanted to demonstrate that there is scholarship into the investigation of what is happening. And I'm just, as a moderator, I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure we have space for questions. There's a really nice one that I want to ask you later, Kumari. But I'm wondering, Olivia, can you help us transition? I want to transition, first of all, your response to this idea of that Kumari was just speaking to with regards to where we are in internationalization, but also if we can sort of say where we are in internationalization and then transition to, and this is what I'm doing, some of the things I'm using, some of my ideas of how I'm approaching my students, how I can maybe and things that other instructors and faculty can use. Because I know that many people in the webinar always want to say, yeah, get something you can share with me? So after I finish attending this, you've convinced me. What can I do?
So what I just shared earlier were a few quotes on the interview participants when it came to inequality or discrimination. In fact, very few students use these vocabularies. And of course, one reason would be they didn't have this mastery of the vocabularies and concept. And on the other hand, as Todd just related to what Minnie-Jean talked about last month, probably just like what I felt, we didn't know what we didn't know. And also, when sometimes at very rare occasions, when a couple of the students were saying, oh, am I discriminated or something, they would eventually, put the blames on them. Because as Kamari just mentioned, the discourse of multiculturalism in Canada and Canada as a good nation just make them believe, okay, it's not it must be me, right? Yeah. So yeah, this lack of knowledge and vocabularies, or concepts that look and related Western phenomena, to me really need the attention of educators and also me in this case as a practitioner, because in addition to my job role as the director of education, I also teach a course on a group of international students who are moving to the MA or MBA programs of Trinity Western University. So next slide, please. This is what I'm going to share is actually a very informal case study because I didn't intend to design that. And that's why, for ethical considerations, I wouldn't share the names of the participants because what I'm going to share is just some, response that I collected from students' assignment. Basically, the curriculum design of this course includes an academic field trip, like a workshop or conference or invited talk by a professor or some scholar. But last March, when this course also was moved online, the field trip became virtual too. And I just happened to find a webinar offered by CBIE entitled Shaping Our Intercultural Competency During the Times of Crisis. I thought this was a good one for, because it was related to the theme and their, the students would be MA or MBA students, right? And it could be helpful for their, future studies.
And this, I'm sorry to interject, is this video easy to find on the CBIE website?
Very easy.
Okay,
that's
good.
why
So
I could download
people
it.
can Google it. People can Google it, and then we can freely use it.
Sure. Yeah. So the virtual field that I did, or the students did, last spring, summer, and fall of 2021, as well as in the spring 2020. Sorry, last year 2020 and this spring 2021, has proven very effective in helping this Asian, so all the students are Asian students. They're from China, India, Bangladesh, Iran, etc. So they learned and they understood and they began to use some Western vocabularies and concepts like stigmatization, discrimination, and equality in not only in finishing the assignments for this field trip. More importantly, I found later, in class discussion or during the carol chats in the break time, they were using these vocabularies. So next slide, please.
Very empowering. Huh?
Well, I was actually surprised last spring when I was reading the forum response, because the students were required to watch the webinar, to write a response essay, on how they could echo or they were inspired by the webinar. And also each of them would be reading and writing comments for one of the classmates' response. So as you can see, here are some selected quotes. We international students should speak out when experiencing racial or regional discrimination. Silence doesn't help. Also, put aside any discrimination against skin colors or regions. Yeah, as an Asian, I suffer from prejudice sometimes from people who have one-sided information of my country. I'm stigmatized as an Indian. So yeah, again, on stigmatization, and as international students, we shouldn't be victims of prejudice and discrimination. We should educate ourselves and fight against it. And also, like, I need to know more about similar topics and strengthen my intercultural competencies. So I know there's a lot of literature on how faculty members and teachers are really lack of support in dealing with the ever increasing internationalization of campus, and they a lot of times are like fighting alone. It's a lot of time they are just doing that based on their own understanding, personal belief, or their agencies or their personal endeavors.
Yeah.
With that, even I'm aware of that, I still believe, by sharing this very small informal case study, that we could actually integrate such concepts or vocabularies or anything that could be related to intercultural competencies in our classroom design, like what I did for this field trip.
This is awesome. Kumari, thoughts?
Unmute. Yeah, I have.
Yeah, we need a big button that says unmute.
Exactly. So I'd like to share about, just very quickly, screen share. I'm just going to go through this very quickly.
And as you're doing this, I want to just reinforce something that someone said in here, from your previous section, that Danielle said that she had never heard the false narrative of Canada's multiculturalism and inclusion summed up so clearly and well. So congratulations, well done.
Well, so from my experience and those of my colleagues and so on, I think we all also want to rush in and make things better. And I think those intentions are really good. However, in doing that, we often run to solutions without really understanding the complexity of the situation. So for example, understanding that there is no real template, because we have to take each context and the situation and so on, the locality of it, where it is, who is it, and so on. And so a lot of this, and I think Olivia is very familiar with this piece of this thing that I've developed, is about we have to become comfortable with discomfort, right? I share that with a lot of my student teachers about dealing with cultural difference and looking at this, that, there are things, there's terrain that we're going into that we don't know about. And so rather than pulling back and looking for the rule book, or the book that tells us what to do, we really need to be able to trust ourselves and look into this relational aspect of what we do, right?
Go through that reflection, that critical reflection process.
Exactly. And then let's lean into that discomfort. And so that change starts with me. I've learned a lot by reading and then discussing those readings with other colleagues and students and other people in general. And to ask the critical questions of myself. Where do my perceptions and ideas about the other come from? How did I come? So be curious about one's own lenses, right? What are my biases, stereotypes? What do I get bugged by? And this is the same, and all of this is all down to good teaching. There never is a separate thing that, oh, when we want to indigenize, we do this, and when we do internationalize, we do this. It's like, given the context, the people, and who we are in classrooms and in our social relations, like, yeah, what constitutes good teaching or good, good relations, right? And to understand, are the rules and structures and norms, like, where do those come from, who has set them, and how do they serve as barriers? I wanted to share this. My colleague Michelle Pigeon and I, Michelle is an Indigenous scholar, and she's also works in higher education in student services. So she and I worked closely together, and we actually wrote a chapter in a book. And so she uses Kirkness and Barnhart's notion of the 4 R's. And she developed this Indigenous holistic framework of the 4 R's, meaning reciprocity, relevance, responsibility, and respect. Not going to go too much into that, except to say we adapted this about how can we learn from Indigenous frameworks in understanding our internationalization frameworks, right? And so are our relationships reciprocal? What responsibility do we bear to land and peoples? In how do we educate immigrants and newcomers and international students about our relationship with Indigenous peoples? How do we educate them about that? And then again, also our environment, right? And climate change and all that. That's how we take our responsibility to stewardship and be allies with. And then how does this inform our relevant policies, programs, and services? How do they become relevant to the current context, right? And then, of course, deep respect for different ways of being and knowing. Yeah. And so I'm going to end with this quote from a very, I cherish this scholar, Gustavo Esteva from Mexico. We need constant reminding to look, listen, and learn rather than to ignore, instruct, and impose. Okay, let's go to Q&A.
Wow, I love that last. It was interesting. We're having the simultaneous script following, and they took his name and made it into Escobar. Thank you, Netflix. But I think what's really interesting, we have some really nice questions here that I would love to go through with you. And I just want to, someone said that, what's your view on enforcing only English use in a classroom as a kind of microaggression? How is that?
Olivia, you want to go first? I have lots to say about that, but yeah.
Well, I think, we should say that there are different scenarios, and for different situations, from probably different people will have different interpretations. And for English itself, for language itself, of course, we wouldn't consider like some comments from the instructors or students who are suggesting or teaching me even, I'm very comfortable using, English is my second language anyways, but I don't think a lot of international students would feel that way. But yeah, if it's English itself, of course, it's not microaggression at all. But the quotes that I shared are actually intended for people to get to know a little bit, what the international students are lived through day to day. And from their perspectives, sometimes they, what the thing is, they sometimes wouldn't interpret it that way. It's me that I am interpreting that. And that's what I said, I didn't know what I didn't know. They didn't know what I didn't know. And for me, I didn't even try to use the lens of race and microaggressions in my dissertation. It was not until the invitation of this webinar I was inspired to use those microaggressions as the perspective to look at those codes. And honestly, to me, I think I'm still learning. Just up until now, after I finished my doctoral degree like 3 or 4 years later, do I start, feeling comfortable using this lens at all? So really,
wow,
good question.
you just gave permission to everybody to like be a learner.
Yeah.
Thank you.
From the perspective of a PhD, it's so elegant. Thank you.
Right. Look, listen, and learn.
Yeah, and I want to touch on another question, and I think Kumari, there's actually one specifically to you, but I want to ask a kind of a general question, and then I think maybe the next one might. Where are the places in our, are there places in our institutions that it already exists for international students to learn and speak out on these topics, and also to develop a deeper awareness and sort of to dialogue around these things? Are there places on our campuses for this?
I think depending on where and when, there are special associations and clubs for international students, but to prevent that from being sort of their own bubble, I know that in some universities, like the Graduate Student Society has been very open about drawing in their international student peers to join but to join the general student body. So
Right.
the invitation needs to be there. And in those spaces, so for example, they as far as I can see, they join spaces like Out on Campus, where they generally join in advocacy for general social justice issues, right? And they join campaigns. But so this is a thing that has to, that space of invitation and hospitality must be there for even people to feel like they can participate and do that. So that piece and that invitation, and back again to that previous question, of course, we have to recognize that we are in English speaking and in French speaking, but to make it clear that this is for the purposes of communication. And there's a difference between using English in the classroom as a mode of learning and communication and versus that professor who yelled about speak English only in their private time. But also now there are instructors and professors who are inviting students to read articles that are translated in their own language and to encourage discussion in their classroom in their own language, and then come back together. So this idea of plurilingualism, right? And so when we create the space and to invite people to say, you have a voice, you need, here's a place, that you can use it. I think they are very much capable of taking off. But I think that's where we are stuck. Even in our research, like people were just they would talk for hours. So this is the first time somebody has asked me for my experience or is interested in my story.
Yeah, they'll talk for hours. Yeah, nobody's ever asked me that before. Right. What I'm going to do, there's 4 questions in here, and maybe we can have a chat about this later, but one, we're sort of running short on time, and we'll need to do a wind up with EJ coming back on in about 25 seconds. But I just want to acknowledge that there are 2 questions, one by an anonymous attendee and one by Mackenzie Sillam that we didn't get to here. And I just want to say, hi, Mackenzie, nice to see you out here in Cyberland. But if we could take a look at those maybe as even as panelists, and if you find it of interest, maybe we could write a short response to it in the post session here. But I maybe should invite EJ back after saying thank you so much to both of you for sharing your research, your lived experience, your hard-earned perspective with us here today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to echo my thanks as well to both of you for sharing your stories and experiences and research, as Todd said. And I feel like you've left us a lot to think about. I see questions are coming in. It's a bummer that we have to end, but yeah, as Todd mentioned, if you're willing to send some of the answers to those questions, we're happy to send them out after with the recording and the PowerPoint presentations as well. So thank you again, Kumari and Olivia. Thank you, Todd, for being our moderator. And a quick reminder that our next session will be on April 27th. The title is Internationalization and Indigenization, Tensions and Collaborations. And that's the end of—
It's going to be fascinating.
It is going to be great. So to everyone out there, have a safe and healthy day, afternoon or evening, wherever you may be, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.